I told you to comply. Turn around.
I am complying. I'm asking for an explanation.
Step back. Don't make this harder than it needs to be.
I'm standing right here. You are already close enough.
Hands where I can see them.
They're in sight. I need you to tell me why you're detaining
Turn
me.
around. Now.
I'm not resisting.
A cop handcuffed her at an airport gate for not complying. But everything changed the moment he learned she was a federal judge. Nobody expects their life to tilt sideways at an airport gate. It usually happens somewhere dramatic, or at least somewhere private. Not under bright lights, not next to a pretzel stand, not while strangers scroll on their phones and wait to board. Asha Fielding thought she had this trip under control. She stood near Gate B, 27 at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport, jacket folded neatly over her arm, carry-on upright by her shin. Her heels were off. Long day, long meetings. She had earned the right to sit down once she was on the plane. All she needed was for the boarding pass to scan and the door to close behind her. The line moved. Quiet shuffling. A few coughs. A man arguing softly into an earpiece. The agent waved the next passenger forward. Asha stepped up, smiled, and handed over her phone. The scanner chirped once, then blinked red. The gate agent frowned at the screen. Her name badge read Lorna Perez. "That's odd," Lorna said, tapping the scanner again. Red light. Asha leaned closer, but kept her voice even. "Would you like me to pull it up again? The app refreshed a minute ago." Lorna sighed, sharper than necessary. "Just wait. Step to the side. No problem." Asha rolled her carry-on a few feet away. She glanced at the departure board. 10 minutes before final boarding. Tight, but workable. She wasn't worried. Systems fail all the time. People understand that. Or at least they used to. Behind the counter, Lorna clicked through menus, her shoulders rising. The line slowed. People shifted their weight. A man 2 spots back muttered something about making a connection. A woman stared openly at Asha, then at the bag, then back again. Asha noticed, but she stayed still. After a moment, she spoke again. Calm, clear. "Is there a seat issue or just a scan problem?" Lorna looked up, eyebrows lifted. "I said wait." There was a pause, long enough for nearby ears to tilt in their direction. "I am waiting," Asha replied. "I'm just asking what's going on." Lorna pursed her lips and reached for the phone under the counter. "Security, I need assistance at the gate." Asha blinked. "For what reason?" Lorna didn't answer. She turned away. That was when the air changed. Not loud, not dramatic, just different. A few heads turned fully now. Someone lifted a phone, not recording yet, just holding it a little higher than normal. Asha felt heat climb her neck, but she kept her posture straight. She checked her watch, then the board again. She inhaled through her nose. "Ma'am?" she said, steady. "I don't understand why security is necessary. If there's a system issue, I can speak with a supervisor." Lorna shot her a look. "You need to lower your voice." "I haven't raised it." That answer did something. Asha couldn't say what exactly, but the line behind her went silent. Footsteps approached from the concourse side, heavy ones. Officer Bradley Henson came into view with his hand already resting on his duty belt. Average height, close-cropped hair. The look of someone arriving certain there was a problem, not here to figure out whether there actually was one. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked. Lorna pointed at Asha without hesitation. "She's refusing to comply, holding up boarding." Asha turned to face him fully. "That's not accurate," she said. "My boarding pass didn't scan. I stepped aside as asked. I requested information. Henson didn't respond to that." He looked at her bag, then at her, then back at the counter. "Sir, or ma'am," he said finally, "you need to step away from the gate." "I already am away from the gate," Asha replied, "and I'm not interfering with boarding." Henson exhaled through his nose. "Lower your tone." "My tone is controlled," she said. "If there's an issue, I'd like a supervisor." Something flickered across his face. Annoyance. Impatience? Maybe both. "You're being argumentative," he said. "That's not helping your situation." Asha felt it then. Not fear. Something colder. The understanding that this was no longer about a boarding pass. She straightened. "Officer, I have done nothing wrong. I am asking for basic information." A man nearby whispered, "She's calm," to no one in particular. Henson didn't acknowledge it. "I'm giving you a lawful order," he said. "Step back, now." But instead of easing, the moment tightened, and the eyes around them didn't look away anymore. Officer Bradley Henson took one step closer, close enough that Asha could see the pale flecks in his eyes. His voice dropped, slower now, as if speaking to a child. "I said, step back." Asha didn't move. Not out of stubbornness, but because she was already where he had told her to go. She lifted her hands slightly, palms open, a universal signal meant to calm things down. "I am not obstructing anything," she said. "I'm asking you to explain why security was called." Henson glanced past her at the line, then back again. "You're delaying boarding." "That is not accurate," she replied. Behind her, someone cleared their throat. A woman near the window seats whispered, "She didn't do anything." Another person raised their phone higher this time, screen glowing. Henson noticed, his jaw set. "Ma'am," he said, sharper now, "your behavior is attracting attention." Asha let out a controlled breath. "That's happening because I'm being spoken to like a problem when one hasn't been explained." Lorna remained behind the counter, arms crossed. She didn't look at Asha once. Henson shifted his stance, feet widening. "You need to follow instructions without commentary." "Commentary?" Asha repeated. "I'm responding to accusations." That word again. Accusations. It seemed to hang there longer than the others. Asha felt the stares pressing in now. Not curiosity anymore. Judgment mixed with confusion. The kind people wear when they don't know what side they're supposed to be on. She thought about the hearings scheduled for the next morning in Santa Fe. About briefs she had reviewed on the plane out. About how tired she was, and how ridiculous this already felt. "Officer," she said, lowering her voice even more. "I am late for official obligations. Please call your supervisor or allow the gate agent to do so." Henson shook his head once. "You don't give directives here." Asha's eyebrows lifted slightly. "I'm not giving a directive. I'm asking." "Last warning," he said. "For what?" she asked. "For refusing to comply." A man 2 rows back spoke up, louder now. "She's not refusing. She's standing right there." Henson turned his head just enough to acknowledge the voice, then dismissed it entirely. "Sir, stay out of this." The man went quiet, but he didn't look away. Asha could hear her heartbeat in her ears now. Not fast, steady. She felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not panic, awareness. The kind that told her this was being witnessed, recorded, judged. She weighed every word before speaking again. "I would like your badge number," she said. That did it. Henson's posture stiffened. "Turn around." "I'm sorry?" "Turn around," he repeated. "Place your hands behind your back." Several people gasped. Someone said, "Are you serious?" out loud. "For what reason?" Asha asked, her voice tight but controlled. "Failure to comply. Disorderly conduct," Henson said quickly, as if the words were preloaded and ready. "That's inaccurate," she said. "I am calm. I am not disruptive." Henson reached for her wrist. That was when the phones came out in earnest. Screens everywhere. One teenager whispered, "Oh my God." Asha instinctively pulled her arm back, not violently, just enough to create space. "Do not touch me," she said. Henson interpreted that movement as justification. "Stop resisting," he said, loud enough for the people filming to hear. "I am not resisting," she replied, but the moment had already passed the point of sense. He grabbed her arm again, twisted it behind her back with practiced ease. Asha winced, not from pain so much as shock. The plastic cuffs clicked closed around her wrists, cold against her skin. A woman near the jet bridge covered her mouth. "This is unbelievable," someone muttered. Asha stood there, hands bound, luggage abandoned, breathing carefully through her nose. She looked straight ahead. "Walk," Henson ordered. "Officer," she said quietly, "this is a mistake." He ignored her. As he guided her away from the gate, voices followed. Questions, protests, silence falling in waves as people processed what they were seeing. Asha didn't look back. She focused on each step, on keeping herself upright, on dignity in a moment determined to strip it away. But as they moved deeper into the terminal, the feeling settled in that this wasn't ending at the gate. It was only just beginning. They walked past a row of empty chairs, then another. The farther they went from the gate, the quieter it became, not because people stopped watching, but because no one knew what to say anymore. Asha's heels clicked unevenly now that her stride was shortened by Henson's grip. He kept one hand on her arm, the other near his radio, posture rigid like a warning sign. Every few seconds, a phone lifted into view, then slid away as they passed. "Where are you taking me?" Asha asked. "To a secure area," Henson replied. "For what purpose?" He didn't answer. They stopped near a wide pillar just outside a closed cafe. The smell of stale coffee hung in the air. Henson positioned her facing the wall. "Stand here," he ordered. Asha complied, not because she was told, but because there was nowhere else to stand. She shifted her wrists, testing the cuffs. Too tight. "These are cutting into me," she said. "I haven't done anything violent." "You should have thought of that earlier," Henson said. "That doesn't make sense," Asha replied. "Nothing about this does." He turned slightly, speaking into his radio now. "I have a non-compliant subject refusing instructions at gate B27. Detained." Refusing instructions. The phrase landed heavy. A middle-aged man in a windbreaker stood several yards away, watching openly. "Officer," he said, "I saw everything. She didn't cause a problem." Henson shot him a look. "Sir, this doesn't concern you." "It does when you're doing this in public," the man replied. Asha didn't look at either of them. She stared at the wall, focusing on the pattern in the tile, on breathing evenly, on not letting anger rush ahead of clarity. "You're escalating something that didn't need to happen," she said carefully. Henson scoffed. "You escalated it." "How?" "You questioned authority." Asha turned her head slowly. "Asking questions is not a crime." Henson leaned closer. "It is when you refuse to listen." "I listened," she said. "What I didn't do was accept blame for something I didn't do." Footsteps approached. Another officer, shorter, older, name tag reading Curtis Vale, stopped a few feet away. "What's going on?" Vale asked. "Disorderly passenger," Henson said. "Interfered with boarding. Non-cooperative." Vale looked at Asha. Took in her posture. The cuffs. The calm on her face that didn't match the report. "Ma'am?" Vale asked. Asha met his eyes. "My boarding pass didn't scan. I stepped aside. I asked for help. I was handcuffed." Vale frowned slightly. "Did you raise your voice?" "No," she said. "Did you threaten anyone?" "No." Vale looked back at Henson. "Anyone hurt?" "No," Henson replied. "Anyone trying to get past her?" Henson hesitated. "She was causing disruption." Vale paused. "By standing still?" Henson's face hardened. "She wouldn't comply." "With what instruction?" Vale asked. The silence stretched just long enough to be noticed. Asha spoke again. "Officer, I am requesting a supervisor, immediately." Henson opened his mouth to shut that down, but Vale raised a hand. "I'll call it in," Vale said. "Not necessary," Henson snapped. "It is if there's confusion," Vale replied evenly. Vale stepped away to make the call. Henson stayed put, jaw set, eyes forward. Asha lowered her voice. "This is being recorded," she said. "I suggest you reconsider your approach." Henson laughed once, short and humorless. You think that scares me? I think the truth should, she replied. That made him turn. You don't know how this works. Asha held his gaze. I know exactly how it works. Vale returned, his tone different now. Supervisors on the way. As they waited, a woman in a blazer approached, hesitantly. Excuse me, she said to Vale. I'm with airport operations. We've had reports of a detainment. Vale nodded. That's correct. The woman looked at Asha, then at the cuffs. Ma'am, may I ask your name? Asha spoke clearly. Asha Fielding. The woman repeated it quietly, pulling out a tablet. Her eyes moved as she typed, and then they stopped. She looked up again, slower this time. Could you say that again? Asha Fielding, Asha repeated. The woman swallowed. As in Judge Fielding? Henson stiffened. Yes, Asha said. That Judge Fielding. No one spoke. But the moment the word settled into the air, every assumption in that terminal began to collapse all at once. The silence that followed her name felt heavier than the handcuffs. Officer Henson didn't move. He didn't speak. His eyes shifted once, then again, like he was waiting for someone to correct what he'd just heard. No one did. The airport operations manager cleared her throat. Judge Fielding, she said carefully. I'm Karen. She stopped herself, glanced at Asha. I'm the on-duty operations lead. I'm sorry. This should not have happened. Henson finally reacted. That doesn't change the behavior, he said quickly, words tumbling out too fast now. Title doesn't exempt anyone. Asha turned her head just enough to face him. You're right, she said. The law applies evenly. That includes you. Officer Vale stepped in between them, his voice calm but firm. Let's slow this down. It's already slowed, Asha replied. It never needed to speed up. More people had gathered now. Not a crowd exactly, but enough. Travelers pretending to tie shoes that were already tied. A couple leaning against the windows pretending not to listen. At least 5 phones still recording, steady as breathing. The operations manager spoke again. Officer, let's remove the restraints. Henson hesitated. I followed procedure. No, Vale said quietly. You didn't. That was the moment Asha noticed the small things. The shift in posture. The way Henson's shoulders dropped a fraction. Not relief. Calculation. The cuffs came off with a sharp click. Asha rubbed her wrists slowly. The skin was red, already rising. I will need the names and badge numbers of everyone involved, she said. Vale nodded. The operations manager nodded. Henson stared straight ahead. Judge Fielding, the manager said, lowering her voice. We can escort you to a private area. Asha shook her head. No, I was brought through this terminal in public. I will walk back the same way. They didn't argue. The walk back felt longer. Not because of distance, but because of the eyes. People looked at her differently now. Recognition mixed with regret. Some avoided her gaze entirely. Others met it and looked embarrassed, as if they had been part of something they didn't fully understand until now. A woman stepped forward near the food court. I'm sorry, she said softly. I should have said more. Asha stopped. You said what you could, she replied. That matters. At the gate, boarding had been paused. Lorna stood rigid behind the counter, her screen dark. She didn't look up when Asha approached. The operations manager addressed her quietly. We'll talk later. Asha picked up her carry-on herself. I'm not getting on that flight, she said. The manager nodded immediately. Of course not. We'll make arrangements. I'm not concerned with arrangements right now, Asha replied. I'm concerned with accountability. Henson lingered at the edge of the gate area, speaking urgently into his radio now. His voice had changed. Higher. Defensive. Asha ignored him. Instead, she turned to the people still standing nearby. If any of you recorded, she said, please don't delete it. A man raised his phone. Already backed up. Good, she replied. Within minutes, supervisors arrived, then a representative from Airport Police Command. Questions came fast, overlapping, tense. Asha answered each one calmly. What exactly was said? Who initiated restraints? Why wasn't de-escalation attempted? Henson tried to speak again, but the room had shifted. He was no longer directing anything. Someone finally asked, "Do you want to file a formal complaint?" Asha didn't answer right away. She looked around the gate one last time. At the chairs, the scanner. The spot where this had turned from inconvenience into something else entirely. "Yes," she said. Immediately, phones kept recording as she was escorted, not detained this time, down a quieter corridor. The videos followed her out into the world long before she reached the end of it, because by the time she sat alone in a small office with a glass wall, her name was already trending, and Officer Bradley Henson's night was about to become much longer than he expected. But as the story began spreading far beyond that terminal, the consequences were only starting to take shape. By the time dawn reached the windows of Phoenix Sky Harbor, the story had already outgrown the airport. The videos moved faster than any internal report ever could. Asha standing still, a voice ordering compliance, plastic cuffs closing, silence from people who knew something was wrong but didn't know how to stop it. The clips jumped from phone to phone, then to feeds, then to screens miles away from the concourse where it all happened. Inside a small conference room near airport administration, Asha sat with a cup of untouched tea, cooling between her hands. Across from her were two officials she had never met, both speaking carefully, choosing words like they were stepping on glass. "We take incidents like this very seriously," one of them said. "I know," Asha replied. "That's part of the problem." They slid a form across the table. "This documents the initial complaint." Asha read the first line and stopped. "Disorderly passenger," she said aloud. "That's inaccurate." A pen scratched. A correction was made. Down the hall, Officer Bradley Henson was sitting alone, his jacket folded on the chair beside him. He'd been told not to leave. Not yet. His phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Calls he wasn't answering. Messages he didn't want to read. A supervisor stepped in. "You're being placed on administrative leave pending review." "For what?" Henson asked, though his voice already carried the answer. "Failure to de-escalate. Improper detainment. Body camera discrepancy." Henson laughed once, hollow. "She refused orders." The supervisor met his eyes. "No." She asked questions. By mid-morning, statements were being issued. Carefully worded. Apologies without admissions. Promises of review. None of it slowed the videos. A legal analyst on a morning show said, "This isn't about her job. It's about what happens when authority reacts instead of listens." A civil rights attorney in Seattle put it more bluntly. "This is textbook." Asha's phone finally rang. She excused herself from the room and answered. "This is Rowan Pike," the voice said. "I represent clients in federal civil rights cases." Asha exhaled. "I assumed this call was coming." "They always do," Pike replied. "But this one is unusually clear." They spoke for less than 10 minutes. It was enough. Back in the room, Asha signed the final page of her statement, then stood. "I have hearings scheduled tomorrow," she said. "They're not canceled." One official hesitated. "You went through something serious last night." "So do people every day," Asha replied. "The difference is who gets believed afterward." The department's internal review moved faster than expected. Witness accounts aligned. Video angles overlapped. The narrative that Henson had tried to establish collapsed under basic scrutiny. That afternoon, the announcement went out. Officer Bradley Henson was terminated. No long-term explanation. No ceremony, just a paragraph acknowledging violations of protocol and failure to uphold standards. Asha learned about it from a reporter waiting outside her hotel. "Do you feel vindicated?" the reporter asked. Asha considered the word. "Vindication would mean it never happened," she said. "This is accountability. They aren't the same." 2 days later, the lawsuit was filed. Federal court. Civil rights violations. Excessive force. False detainment. The amount listed caught headlines on its own, but Asha focused on the language instead. Dignity, harm, pattern. When asked what she wanted most from the case, she gave the same answer every time. "I want procedures to mean something," she said. "I want questions to be allowed without punishment." Henson released a statement through an attorney. He denied wrongdoing, claimed misunderstanding, said the situation escalated beyond his control. Asha read it once and set it down. Later that night, alone in her room, she finally took a deep breath that didn't feel measured. Her wrists were still sore. The mark was faint now, but present. She thought about the gate, about how quickly normal turned into something else, about how many people had thanked her for being calm, when calm had not protected her at all. But while headlines would fade, the lesson pressed forward, demanding to be reckoned with one way or another. A week later, the airport looked the same. Same gates, same chairs bolted to the floor, same scanners blinking red when they felt like it. Travelers moved through with their bags and their deadlines, unaware of how close the space had come to meaning something else entirely. Asha Fielding returned to her chambers in Santa Fe without ceremony. No cameras, no statements, just case files stacked where she'd left them, clerks waiting with questions, the familiar rhythm of work resuming as if nothing had happened. But something had. During a hearing midweek, an attorney grew frustrated and snapped, "With respect, Your Honor, this procedure makes no sense." The courtroom went still. Asha looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I appreciate the question. Let's talk through it." No reprimand, no warning, just conversation. Afterward, her clerk, Jonah Reese, hesitated in the doorway. "May I ask you something?" Asha glanced up. "You just did." He smiled nervously. "Has any of this changed how you see things?" She considered it. "It changed how clearly I hear them," she replied. Outside that courtroom, the lawsuit worked its way forward. Depositions, emails, training manuals read aloud in rooms where excuses ran out quickly. Policies that looked good on paper struggled to explain actions caught on multiple angles. The department announced revisions, new requirements, language about communication and restraint. Promises made loud enough to be heard. Whether they would stick was a different question. Bradley Henson didn't give interviews anymore. Friends he expected to hear from stayed quiet. The job he thought defined him had disappeared in a paragraph online. He told anyone who would listen that the system failed him too. No one argued that systems failed. They just didn't fail evenly. Asha received letters, handwritten, messy, careful, from people who had never set foot in a federal courtroom but knew that feeling of standing still while authority decided who you were. One line showed up again and again. "I thought I was alone until I saw you." She never answered publicly. She didn't need to. What she wanted was smaller and harder. She wanted people to remember that silence is often mistaken for guilt, that asking questions should not carry risk, that compliance without understanding is not order, it's pressure. Near the end of the year, she stood at an airport gate again. Different city, different airline, same sound when the scanner worked. Green light. The agent smiled. "You're all set." Asha smiled back and walked through, just another traveler this time. Or so it looked. As she took her seat, a woman across the aisle leaned over. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I recognized you." Asha waited. "Thank you," the woman added, "for not letting them rewrite what happened." Asha nodded. "Thank you for paying attention." The plane lifted. The city dropped away. The world kept moving, not faster, not better automatically, but aware. And that mattered more than any headline. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt pressured to stay quiet to keep things smooth, remember this story. Ask the question. Say the thing. Document what happens. Because accountability doesn't begin in courtrooms or policies. It begins the moment someone decides to listen when they're told not to. And if this story made you pause even for a second, hold on to that feeling. Because attention is where change actually starts.